The mountains of eastern Afghanistan stretched endlessly under a pewter sky, their jagged peaks cutting into clouds heavy with the promise of snow. Lieutenant Marcus Kane pressed himself against the cold granite outcropping and checked his watch, for the third time in 2 minutes. 0847 hours. They were 13 minutes past their scheduled extraction window, and the silence from their comms was becoming a death sentence. Viper 6, this is Kodiak 1-6, over. Kane's voice was steady, despite the ice forming in his chest. Static answered him. Viper 6, do you copy? We are at extract coordinates requesting immediate pickup. More static. Petty Officer First Class. Diego Ramirez belly-crawled up beside him, his M4 carbine cradled in his arms like a sleeping child. Snow had begun to dust his shoulders, turning his digital camouflage into something that belonged more to winter than the desert patterns they'd grown accustomed to in this god-forsaken theater. LT, we got movement down in the valley, Ramirez whispered, his breath forming small clouds that dissipated quickly in the thin air. Looks like a whole damn welcoming committee. Kane pulled out his spotting scope and surveyed the terrain below. Through the magnified lens, he could make out at least 30 Taliban fighters working their way up the mountainside in a coordinated sweep pattern. They moved with purpose, not the random wandering of a patrol. Someone had told them exactly where to look. How the hell did they know we'd be here? Petty Officer Second Class. Tommy Fletcher had materialized beside them like a ghost, his boyish face streaked with dirt and exhaustion. At 22, Fletcher was the youngest member of their 8-man team, but he'd proven himself in more firefights than men twice his age. Kane didn't answer immediately. The same question had been eating at him since they'd lost contact with their helicopter support 40 minutes ago. This was supposed to be a simple observation post, monitor Taliban supply, routes through the coast province, and radio back intelligence. No engagement, no heroics, just eyes and ears. But simple missions in Afghanistan had a way of turning deadly without warning. Chief, what's our ammo situation? Kane called softly to Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison, who was positioned behind a cluster of boulders with the rest of their team. Morrison's gravelly voice carried the weight of 15 years in special operations. We got maybe 400 rounds total plus the 2 grenades, not exactly Rambo numbers, LT. Kane felt the familiar weight of command settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. 8 men under his leadership, all of them depending on his decisions to get them home to their families. Fletcher had a pregnant wife in Virginia Beach. Ramirez had twin daughters who just started kindergarten. Morrison was 3 months from retirement and a fishing boat in Key West. The radio crackled to life, startling them all. Kodiak 1-6, this is Overwatch 7-7, over. Kane grabbed his handset, hope flaring in his chest. Overwatch 7-7, this is Kodiak 1-6. We are in need of immediate extraction at Grid November Delta 7742. We have hostiles approaching our position, over. Kodiak 1-6, be advised we have no assets available for extraction at this time. You are ordered to hold position and await further instructions. The voice on the other end was cold, professional, and utterly devoid of anything resembling urgency. Kane felt something dark and poisonous unfurl in his stomach. Negative, Overwatch 7-7. We have 30-plus hostiles converging on our position. We need air support or extraction now. We cannot hold this position indefinitely. A long pause filled with static. Kodiak 1-6, you are ordered to maintain radio silence and hold position. Further transmissions will compromise operational security. The radio went dead. Kane stared at the handset for a long moment, processing what had just happened. In 15 years of military service, he'd never been hung out to dry so blatantly. Someone wanted them to disappear in these mountains. What the hell was that about? Morrison had crawled over, his weathered face grim. Politics, Kane said, simply. But even as he said it, he knew it was more than that. This felt personal. The crack of rifle fire echoed off the mountain walls, and chips of granite exploded from the rocks near Fletcher's head. The kid rolled away, bringing his weapon up. "Contact left!" Ramirez's voice cut through the thin air. The Taliban fighters had found them. What followed was a ballet of violence that Kane had performed too many times to count. His team moved, with the fluid precision of warriors who had trained together until their responses became muscle memory. Morrison laid down covering fire while Petty Officers Williams and Santos flanked left. Fletcher and Jackson took high ground while Ramirez called out targets, but even as they fought, Kane could see the mathematics of their situation. They were outnumbered 4-1, low on ammunition, and trapped on a mountainside with no support. Coming. The Taliban weren't in a hurry. They had the high ground above and blocking positions below. All they had to do was wait. "LT!" Fletcher's voice carried a note of panic that sent ice through Kane's veins. "We got more tangos coming up. The North Ridge. Looks like another 20. Kane risked a look over his cover. The kid was right. They were being surrounded. "Chief, we need to move, now." Morrison nodded grimly. "Where to, LT? We're pretty much surrounded by people who want to kill us." Kane studied the terrain. There was a narrow saddle about 200 meters up the mountain that might provide better defensive positions, but getting there would mean crossing open ground under fire. It was a desperate gamble, but staying put was certain death. We bound up to that saddle in pairs, Morrison and Williams first, then... The world exploded in dirt and rock as an RPG detonated 20 meters from their position. The concussion left Kane's ears ringing, but through the haze he could see Taliban fighters advancing from 3 sides. "Move! Move! Move!" Kane's voice cracked like a whip. His team responded instantly, bounding up the mountainside in the practiced leapfrog pattern they'd drilled 1,000 times. But the Taliban had anticipated the move. Automatic weapons fire stitched the ground around them, and Kane watched Santos stumble, red blooming across his shoulder. "Santos is hit!" Jackson's voice was tight with controlled fear. "Keep moving!" Kane grabbed Santos under his good arm, half carrying the wounded SEAL toward the saddle. "We don't leave anyone behind!" They made it to the ridgeline, but their situation hadn't improved. If anything, it had gotten worse. They now had a commanding view of just how thoroughly they were surrounded. Taliban fighters were moving up the mountain like ants, and more were taking positions to cut off any escape route. Kane tried the radio again, cycling through every frequency he had. Nothing but static. "We're on our own," he told his team. Morrison was already setting up fields of fire, positioning his men to cover the approaches. "How long you think we can hold out, LT?" Kane looked at his watch. 0923 hours. "Long as we have ammunition." It wasn't much of an answer, but it was the only honest one he had. The firefight resumed with deadly intensity. Kane's team made every round count, but the Taliban had numbers and patience on their side. They would advance, take casualties, fall back, and regroup. Meanwhile, Kane's ammunition dwindled with each engagement. Fletcher was down to his last magazine when he called out, "LT, I can see their command element. 3 guys with radios, about 400 meters down the slope." Kane looked through his scope. The kid was right. Take out the command element, and they might buy some time as the attack lost coordination. "Take the shot," Kane ordered. Fletcher's rifle cracked once, twice, 3 times. Through his binoculars, Kane watched 2 of the 3 Taliban leaders drop. The third dove for cover, but the damage was done. The coordinated assault faltered as squads lost communication with each other. It was a temporary reprieve, but temporary was all they had. Santos was getting worse. The bullet had shattered his shoulder blade, and he was losing blood despite the field dressing Jackson had applied. His face was pale, and his breathing was becoming labored. "How you doing, Santos?" Kane knelt beside the wounded SEAL. "Been better, LT." Santos managed a weak smile. But I ain't checking out yet. Kane squeezed his good shoulder. That's what I want to hear. But privately, Kane knew they were all on borrowed time. His team was down to maybe 50 rounds total. Santos needed medical attention they couldn't provide, and the Taliban were regrouping for another assault. He tried the radio one more time, broadcasting on the emergency frequency. Any station, this is Kodiak 1-6. We are 8 U.S. Navy personnel surrounded and under fire at grid November Delta 7742. We have 1 wounded and are in immediate need of air support or extraction. Any station, please respond. Static. Well, gentlemen, Kane said to his team, looks like we're going out the hard way. Morrison chambered around. Wouldn't be the first time. That's when they heard it. A sound that didn't belong in these mountains. The deep, throaty growl of twin turbofan engines echoing off the granite walls. Kane looked up, scanning the sky. You hear that? Fletcher's voice was barely a whisper. They all heard it. The unmistakable sound of an A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Air Force's flying tank killer affectionately known as the Warthog. That's impossible, Morrison said. There's no A-10s operating in this sector. The sound grew louder, and suddenly Kane could see it. A gray shape. The A-10 Warthog circled overhead like a mechanical vulture, its twin engines creating a thunderous echo that bounced off the mountain walls. Kane stared at the aircraft through his binoculars, his hands trembling, not from the cold, but from the impossible reality of who was in that cockpit. Richard Hawkins, Reaper, the man Kane had watched die 3 years ago in the burning wreckage of a downed helicopter in Fallujah. LT? You copy that transmission? Morrison's voice seemed to come from very far away. Kane's throat felt like sandpaper. I copy. But how could he explain to his team that their potential salvation was piloted by a ghost? How could he tell them that the last time he'd seen Captain Hawkins, the pilot had been screaming Kane's name as flames consumed his aircraft while Kane chose to save 3 other wounded men instead? The radio crackled again. Kodiak 1-6, I'm showing multiple heat signatures converging on your position. Looks like you've stirred up a hornet's nest down there. Hawkins' voice was different, harder, colder than Kane remembered. 3 years ago, Reaper had been the kind of pilot who would buzz the tower just to make ground crews nervous, who would volunteer for the most dangerous missions with a grin and a joke. This voice belonged to someone who had walked through fire and emerged changed. Hog 7-7. Kane hesitated, unsure how to respond. Did Hawkins recognize his voice? Did he know who he was talking to? We have approximately 50 hostiles in a coordinated assault. We're down to minimum ammunition and have 1 wounded. Copy that, Kodiak 1-6. I can see the whole party from up here. Taliban's got you boxed in good and tight. Kane watched. The A-10 bank into another wide turn. The aircraft moved with deadly grace, and he could see the massive GAU-8 Avenger cannon mounted in its nose, a 7-barrel Gatling gun capable of firing 3,900 rounds per minute of 30mm depleted uranium. Shells, each round could punch through a tank. Hog 7-7, we are cleared hot on all targets outside our perimeter, Kane transmitted, using the standard authorization for close air support. Silence stretched over the radio for long seconds. Too long. LT, Fletcher whispered. Why isn't he engaging? Kane knew why. Down in the valley, Taliban fighters were maneuvering for another assault, clearly visible from the air. A single gun run from the A-10 would scatter them like leaves. But Hawkins was hesitating. The radio crackled. Kodiak 1-6. I need you to authenticate your identity. Morrison looked at Kane sharply. Authentication protocols weren't standard for close air support in combat situations. Pilots typically trusted ground controllers to be who they claimed to be. There wasn't time for elaborate verification procedures when people were shooting at each other. Hog 77, we are taking effective fire. Request immediate close air support. I need authentication, Kodiak 16. State your unit designation and commanding officer. Kane's mind raced. Hawkins was stalling, but why? Did he suspect who Kane was? Or was there something else happening? SEAL Team 6, Bravo Platoon. Commanding Officer Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell. Another long pause. Copy that. And your name? Kodiak 16. Kane's heart hammered against his ribs. There it was, the moment of truth. He could lie, give a false name, and maybe Hawkins would provide the air support they desperately needed, or he could tell the truth and face whatever consequences came with it. Below them, Taliban fighters were moving closer. Santos was getting worse, his breathing shallow and rapid. They had maybe 10 minutes before the enemy was close enough to overrun their position. Kodiak 16, I asked for your name. Kane closed his eyes. Lieutenant Marcus Kane. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Kane could hear his own heartbeat, the labored breathing of his wounded teammate, the distant chatter of Taliban voices carrying on the mountain air. Well, well, well. Hawkins's voice finally came through the radio, and there was something dark and terrible in it. Marcus fucking Kane. I wondered if I'd ever run into you again. Morrison grabbed Kane's arm. LT, what the hell is going on? Kane shook his head, still staring at the circling A-10. It's complicated, Chief. Hog 77, Kane transmitted. We can sort out our history later. Right now I've got 7 men depending on... 7 men, Hawkins interrupted. Same number you had 3 years ago in Fallujah. Remember that day, Marcus? I sure as hell, I do. The A-10 had stopped circling and was now flying in a straight line away from their position. Kane watched through his binoculars as the aircraft grew smaller. He's leaving, Fletcher said, his young voice cracking with disbelief. That son of a bitch is leaving us here. Kane felt the weight of his team's stares. They knew something was wrong, but they didn't know what. How could he explain that their only hope for survival had just flown away because of a decision he'd made 3 years ago in another war zone? LT? Morrison's voice was carefully controlled. You want to tell us what that was about? Before Kane could answer, Taliban fighters appeared on the ridgeline to their east. The enemy had used the distraction of the aircraft to maneuver closer. Contact right! Williams opened fire, his M4 chattering. The firefight erupted with renewed intensity. Kane's team responded automatically, muscle memory taking over as they engaged targets and shifted positions. But Kane could see the defeat in their movements, the knowledge that they were alone and running out of time. Santos was unconscious now, his face gray with blood loss. Jackson was down to his last magazine. They had maybe 5 minutes of ammunition left. Kane tried the radio one more time. Any station, this is Kodiak 16 requesting immediate close air support at grid November Delta 7742. Nothing but static. That's when Morrison crawled over to him, his weathered face grim. LT, I need you to tell me what happened back there. That pilot knew you. Kane kept his eyes on the enemy positions below. It's not important right now. Chief? Bullshit. Morrison's voice carried the authority of 15 years leading men in combat. That aircraft was our ticket out of here, and something you did made him fly away. My men deserve to know why they're going to die. Kane finally looked at his team leader. Morrison's eyes were hard but not accusing. He was a professional trying to understand how a viable mission had turned into a suicide run. 3 years ago in Fallujah, Kane began, his voice barely audible over the gunfire. We were running a joint operation with Air Force KS. Hawkins, that pilot. His helicopter got shot down. I was team leader on the ground recovery mission. And? Kane's throat felt like it was full of broken glass. There were multiple casualties. I could only save 3 men with the time and personnel I had. Hawkins was alive but trapped in the wreckage. I made the call to save the other three first. Morrison's expression didn't change. And Hawkins? The bird exploded before we could get back to him. I watched him die. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of gunfire and Taliban voices getting closer. "You followed protocol," Morrison said finally. "Greatest number of lives saved. Any of us would have made the same call." "Tell that to Hawkins." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "LT, that man is supposed to be dead. How is he flying an A-10 over Afghanistan?" Kane had been wondering the same thing. He'd attended Hawkins' memorial service, had watched them present a folded flag to the pilot's young wife, had carried the guilt of that decision for 3 years. "I don't know, Chief. But right now, it doesn't matter. We're on our own." As if to emphasize the point, Taliban fighters appeared on the slope directly below them, close enough that Kane could see their faces. The noose was tightening. Fletcher's rifle clicked empty. "I'm out." "Me too," Williams called from behind a boulder. Kane looked at his watch. 0954 hours. They'd been in the fight for over an hour, but it felt like a lifetime. "Conserve ammunition," Kane ordered. "Make every shot count." But even as he said it, he knew it was meaningless. They were down to maybe 20 rounds total. The Taliban could afford to be patient now. That's when he heard it again. The deep growl of twin turbofans echoing off the mountain walls. Kane looked up to see the A-10 coming back, flying low and fast through the same mountain pass. But this time, there was something different about its approach. The aircraft wasn't circling, it was coming in hot on an attack run. The radio crackled to life. "Kodiak 1-6, this is Hog 7-7. I want you to know something before we do this." Kane grabbed his handset. "Hog 7-7, go ahead." "I survived that day in Fallujah. 3rd-degree burns over 60% of my body. 17 surgeries, 3 years of physical therapy. They discharged me from the Air Force, said I'd never fly again." The A-10 was getting closer, and Kane could see that it wasn't painted in standard military colors. The aircraft was solid black with no national insignia. "So how are you here?" Kane asked. "Private military contractor. Turns out there's good money in being a ghost who can fly close air support for people who don't officially exist." Kane felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "Hawkins, who are you working for?" The A-10 was almost on top of the Taliban positions. Now, its massive gun pointing down at the enemy fighters. "Same people who sent you to this mountain, Marcus. Same people who cut off your communications and left you here to die." Kane's blood turned to ice as the implications hit him. "You're not here to help us." "Oh, but I am," Hawkins are. The mountain exploded around them. 30mm shells tore through granite like tissue paper, sending house-sized boulders tumbling down the slope in an avalanche of destruction. Kane threw himself over Santos's unconscious form as razor-sharp. Rock fragments whined through the air where his head had been a split second before. "What the fuck?" Morrison's voice was lost in the thunderous roar of the A-10's gun, but Kane could see his lips moving, see the absolute fury in the chief's eyes. The Warthog streaked overhead, pulling up into a climbing turn that would bring it around for another pass. Kane rolled off Santos and grabbed his radio, his hands shaking with adrenaline and rage. "Hawkins! What the hell are you doing?" The pilot's laughter came through the radio like broken glass. "Teaching you a lesson about consequences, Marcus. About what it feels like to watch good men die because of someone else's choices." Kane looked around desperately. The Taliban fighters below had scattered when the A-10 opened fire, taking cover behind rocks and in crevices. They were as confused as Kane's team. Nobody expected the American aircraft to be shooting at Americans. "You're insane," Kane transmitted. "These men had nothing to do with Fallujah." "Neither did I," Hawkins shot back. "But that didn't stop you from leaving me to burn." Fletcher was pressed against a boulder, his young face pale with shock. "LT, is that pilot trying to kill us?" Kane didn't answer. He was studying the terrain, looking for any kind of cover that might protect his team from a 30mm cannon designed to destroy tanks. There wasn't any. If Hawkins wanted them dead, they were dead. The A-10 came around for another pass, lower this time, and Kane could see the pilot's helmet in the cockpit. Hawkins had positioned himself perfectly. He could strafe Kane's team while the Taliban watched from safety below. "Hog 7-7, Kane tried again. "You've got Taliban fighters in the open down there. Easy targets." "I'm not here for them, Marcus. I'm here for you." The gun roared again, but this time the shells impacted 50 meters to their left, carving a trench in the mountainside that would have accommodated a subway tunnel. Hawkins was playing with them, demonstrating just how helpless they were. Morrison crawled over to Kane, staying low as fragments continued to rain down around them. "LT, that bastard's gonna kill us all unless we do something." "Like what, Chief? We've got small arms against an A-10 Warthog. That's like trying to stop a freight train with a BB gun." "Then we better think of something fast, because here he comes again." Kane watched the black aircraft line up for another attack run. This time, Hawkins would probably finish what he'd started. But as the Warthog approached, something strange happened. Taliban fighters below began opening fire on the A-10 with their AK-47s and RPGs. The irony wasn't lost on Kane. The enemy was trying to protect them from their own air support. Hawkins's voice crackled over the radio, and for the first time, he sounded uncertain. "Marcus, tell your Taliban friends to stand down. This is between us." "They're not my friends, you psychotic bastard. They're trying to kill us, too." An RPG streaked past the A-10's wing, close enough to rattle the pilot. Kane could see the aircraft waver slightly as Hawkins fought to maintain his attack profile. "Hog 7-7, Kane transmitted. "You've got multiple RPGs tracking you. Break off and climb." "Why do you care what happens to me?" Hawkins snarled. "Because despite everything, I'm not going to sit here and watch you die again." The words hung in the air between them, transmitted across radio waves and 3 years of guilt and grief. Kane watched the A-10 pull up sharply as another RPG missed its tail by inches. "You should have saved me first," Hawkins said, and his voice carried the weight of every nightmare he'd lived through since Fallujah. "I know," Kane replied quietly. "I've relived that day 1,000 times. I've wondered if I made the right choice, if there was something else I could have done. But Richard, these men down here had nothing to do with that decision. They're good soldiers who deserve to go home to their families." The A-10 circled high above, out of RPG range. Kane could imagine Hawkins in the cockpit, scarred hands gripping the controls, making a choice that would define both their fates. Santos stirred beside him, his eyes fluttering open. "LT? What's happening?" "We're in a bit of a situation, Santos. How you feeling?" "Like I got shot." Santos managed a weak smile. "Who's shooting at us now?" "Everybody," Morrison answered grimly. The Taliban fighters below had regrouped and were moving up the slope again, emboldened by the fact that the American aircraft seemed more interested in attacking the American ground team than providing close air support. Kane's radio came to life. "Kodiak 1-6, this is Hog 7-7. Go ahead." "I want to make a deal with you, Marcus." Kane felt ice forming in his chest. "What kind of deal?" "I'll take out the Taliban fighters, all of them. Clear your path to the extraction point, 3 clicks south of your position. And in return, you give yourself up. Come with me. Leave your team behind just like you left me behind." Kane looked at his men. Fletcher with his pregnant wife. Morrison 3 months from retirement, Santos bleeding and in need of medical attention. All of them depending on him to get them home. "That's not the same thing, Hawkins. You know it's not. Feels the same from where I'm sitting. One man's life measured against others. Except this time, you get to be the one who gets left behind." Taliban fighters were less than 100 meters away now. Kane could hear their voices, could see them moving from cover to cover as they advanced up the mountain. "LT," Fletcher whispered. "What's he talking about?" Kane ignored the question, focusing on the impossible choice Hawkins was offering him. Trade his life for his team's survival. It should have been an easy decision. The needs of the many outweighed the needs of the few. But Kane knew that accepting Hawkins's offer would destroy something fundamental in his men, would make them complicit in abandoning their leader, just as Kane had been forced to abandon the pilot 3 years ago. "Hawkins," Kane transmitted, "if I agree to this, how do I know you'll keep your word? How do I know you won't kill my team anyway? Because, unlike some people, I keep my promises." The words cut deep, but Kane pushed past the pain. He was running out of time and options. Taliban fighters were close enough now that he could see their individual faces, could make out the expressions of determined hatred as they climbed toward the American position. "I need guarantees," Kane said. "My team gets safe passage to the extraction point. They get picked up. They go home. You have my word." "The word of a dead man working for private contractors? That's supposed to comfort me?" "It's all you've got, Marcus." Kane looked at his team one more time. Morrison was watching him with knowing eyes. The chief had figured out what was happening. Fletcher and Jackson were focused on the approaching enemy. Williams was trying to make Santos more comfortable. Good men, all of them. Men who deserved better than to die on this mountain because of choices made years before they'd even met Kane. "Kodiak 1-6, Hawkins pressed. "I need an answer. Taliban's almost on top of you." Kane keyed his radio. "I accept." "LT, no." Morrison grabbed Kane's arm. "Whatever this is about, we don't leave people behind. That's not who we are." Kane gently pulled free from the chief's grip. "Take care of the team, Jake. Get them home." "Marcus," Hawkins's voice had changed subtly. Less angry, more businesslike. "I'm going to make one gun run to clear your immediate area. When I pull up, you start walking down the mountain. My people will pick you up at the bottom." "Your people?" "The same ones who sent you here to die. Turns out they pay very well for services rendered." Kane felt the last piece of the puzzle click into place. This entire mission had been a setup from the beginning. Someone had wanted his team dead, but Hawkins had offered an alternative: capture instead of execution. The A-10 came screaming, down out of the sky like an avenging angel. This time, the 30mm shells found their intended targets. Taliban fighters disappeared in explosions of dirt and rock as the depleted uranium rounds tore through their positions. The coordinated assault dissolved into chaos as survivors scrambled for cover. "Go," Morrison said simply. "We'll make it to the extraction point." Kane handed his M4 to Fletcher and started walking down the mountain. Each step felt like betrayal, but he forced himself to keep moving. Behind him, he could hear his team calling his name, but he didn't turn around. The Taliban fighters who had survived Hawkins' gun run scattered as Kane approached. They had no orders concerning a lone American, walking calmly through their midst, and confusion kept them from shooting. At the bottom of the mountain, a black SUV waited with its engine running. 2 men in tactical gear stood beside it, their faces hidden behind sunglasses and balaclavas. Kane recognized the type: private military contractors, soldiers of fortune, who worked in the gray areas between nations and loyalties. "Lieutenant Kane?" One of the men spoke with a slight accent Kane couldn't place. "That's me." "Get in the vehicle, please." Kane looked back up the mountain one last time. He could see his team moving toward the extraction point, Morrison helping Santos walk. They would make it. His sacrifice had bought their lives. As the SUV pulled away, Kane's radio crackled one final time. "Marcus," Hawkins's voice was quiet, almost thoughtful. "For what it's worth, I think I understand now why you made the choice you did in folly. The safe house squatted in the Afghan mountains like a concrete cancer, its brutalist architecture a testament to Soviet occupation 30 years past. Kane sat in a windowless room, his wrists zip-tied to a metal chair that had seen better decades. 48 hours had passed since his capture, marked only by the irregular delivery of stale bread and tepid water. The door opened with a metallic shriek that set Kane's teeth on edge. Richard Hawkins stepped inside, and Kane barely recognized the man he'd known 3 years ago. The left side of Hawkins's face was a topographical map of surgical scars, the skin pulled tight and shiny where grafts had been applied. His left ear was gone entirely, replaced by a flesh-colored prosthetic that fooled no one. When he moved, Kane could see the careful way he held his left arm, permanent nerve damage from the burns. "Hello, Marcus." Hawkins pulled up a second chair and sat down across from Kane. "You look well. Afghanistan's been good to you." "Can't say the same about you, Richard." Kane kept his voice neutral. "I thought you were dead." "I was, for all practical purposes. 90 seconds in a burning helicopter will do that to a man." Hawkins's right hand, the undamaged one, absently touched the scars on his neck. "They had to reconstruct my vocal cords. I used to sing, karaoke nights at the officers' club. Can't hit a high note anymore." Kane felt the familiar weight of guilt settle on his shoulders. "Richard, I'm sorry. If there had been any way to save it." Hawkins's voice was flat, emotionless. "I didn't bring you here for apologies. I brought you here because we have business to discuss." "What kind of business?" Hawkins reached into his jacket and pulled out a tablet computer. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward Kane. The display showed a satellite image of the mountain where Kane's team had been trapped. "Your boys made it to the extraction point," Hawkins said. "Helicopter picked them up 6 hours after you walked down that mountain. Santos is in a German military hospital getting excellent care. The others are back at their base, filing after-action reports that will never see the light of day." Relief flooded through Kane's chest. "They're alive. All 7 of them, yes. I kept my word." Hawkins swiped to another image, this one showing the Taliban casualties from his gun run. 34 confirmed kills. Clean sweep." Kane studied the tablet screen. "So what now? You've got your revenge. My team is safe. Where? Does that leave us?" "That's the interesting question, isn't it?" Hawkins set the tablet aside and leaned back in his chair. "See, Marcus, you've become quite valuable. More valuable than I initially realized." "Valuable to who?" "To the people who orchestrated this little drama. The same people who sent your team into that mountain knowing full well it was a trap." Kane felt cold fingers walking up his spine. "What are you talking about?" Hawkins smiled, and the expression was made grotesque by his facial scars. "Operation Fallen Angel. Ever heard of it?" Kane shook his head. "Black-budget program run by a joint task force of CIA, DIA, and some private contractors with very deep pockets. The official mission is counterterrorism, identifying and eliminating high-value targets throughout Central Asia. The unofficial mission is a bit more entrepreneurial." "Meaning?" "Meaning there's a lot of money to be made in this war, Marcus. Weapons trafficking, drug smuggling, rare earth mineral extraction. But sometimes legitimate military operations get in the way of business. Sometimes good soldiers ask inconvenient questions or stumble across things they shouldn't see." Kane's mind raced as the implications became clear. "You're saying my team was sent there to be killed because we discovered something we shouldn't have?" "Your team was conducting surveillance on what you thought were Taliban supply routes. What you actually discovered was a CIA-protected opium trafficking operation that generates about $50 million a year in off-the-books funding for Fallen Angel." Kane remembered the intelligence briefings, the careful way certain areas had been marked as observation only on their mission maps. He'd assumed it was to avoid civilian casualties or diplomatic complications. Now he understood the real reason. "The photographs Fletcher took through his spotting scope," Kane said slowly. "The convoy movements we documented. Would have exposed a multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise if they'd made it back to official channels. So the decision was made to eliminate your entire team and blame it on Taliban action. But you intervened." Hawkins nodded. "I was supposed to provide the cover story. Official reports would show that Captain Richard Hawkins, flying under contract for Fallen Angel, provided close air support to a SEAL team under attack. Unfortunately, despite his heroic efforts, all 8 team members were killed in action." Kane felt sick. "Instead, you saved them." "Instead, I found myself face to face with the man who left me to die in Fallujah. Karma has a twisted sense of humor, doesn't it?" Kane looked around the windowless room, taking in the concrete walls and the single bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling. "So what changed your mind? Why didn't you just follow orders and kill us all?" Hawkins was quiet for a long moment, his scarred fingers drumming against his knee. "Do you know what it's like to burn alive, Marcus? To feel your skin melting, your lungs filling with superheated air, your nerve endings screaming until they finally just stop working?" Kane didn't answer. "I had a lot of time to think about dying while I was trapped in that helicopter. A lot of time to think about the choices that led me there. And you know what I realized?" "What?" "I realized that if our positions had been reversed, if you had been trapped and I'd been the one making the call about who to save first, I would have made the exact same decision you did. Greatest good for the greatest number. It's what we're trained to do." Kane felt something shift in the room's atmosphere, a subtle change in the dynamic between them. "That doesn't mean I forgive you," Hawkins continued, "but it means I understand you. And understanding you made me realize that killing your team wouldn't give me the satisfaction I thought it would. It would just make me complicit in the same kind of bureaucratic murder that we both signed up to fight against. So you saved them instead. I saved them. But now we have a problem." Kane waited. "Fallen Angel knows their operation has been compromised. They know your team has evidence that could destroy them, and they know I didn't follow orders." Hawkins stood up and began pacing the small room. "There's a kill order out on all of us. Now, your team, me, you, we're all loose ends that need to be tied up. How long do we have? Maybe 72 hours before they track down your boys and finish the job. As for us," Hawkins shrugged, "this safe house is blown. They'll find us soon enough." Kane tested his zip-tie restraints for the 100th time, still secure. "So, what's your plan, Richard? You didn't bring me here just to have a heart-to-heart about forgiveness and understanding." Hawkins stopped pacing and looked directly at Kane. "I brought you here because I need your help. Fallen Angel is too big to fight alone, and your team is too valuable to lose to some CIA accountant's idea of damage control." "My help? You know how this organization thinks, how it operates. You've been inside the machine long enough to understand its weaknesses, and despite everything that's happened between us, I trust you to do the right thing when it matters." Kane felt a laugh building in his throat. "You trust me? After what happened in Fallujah?" "Especially because of what happened in Fallujah. You made a hard choice under impossible circumstances, and you've carried the weight of that decision ever since. That tells me you're someone who understands consequences, who takes responsibility for his actions." Hawkins pulled a combat knife from his belt and moved behind Kane's chair. Kane tensed, but instead of feeling the blade against his throat, he felt the zip ties fall away from his wrists. "What are you doing?" Kane asked, rubbing circulation back into his hands. "Giving you a choice," Hawkins said, setting the knife on the table between them. "You can try to kill me. I'm sure you blame me for everything that's happened. Or you can help me save your team and expose Fallen Angel before they disappear into the black budget bureaucracy forever." Kane looked at the knife, then at Hawkins's scarred face. The pilot stood perfectly still, his hands at his sides, completely vulnerable. It would be easy. One quick thrust, and 3 years of guilt and nightmares would be over. Instead, Kane stood up slowly and walked to the single small window. Outside, he could see mountains stretching endlessly toward the horizon, their peaks lost in gray clouds that promised snow. "If I help you," Kane said without turning around, "what happens to my team?" "If we succeed, they go home as heroes. Their evidence gets used to prosecute the real criminals, and they get to live normal lives without looking over their shoulders. And if we fail, then we all die, and Fallen Angel continues business as usual." Kane turned back to face Hawkins. "Not much of a choice. It's the only choice we have." Kane walked back to the table and picked up the knife. For a moment, he saw something flicker in Hawkins's eyes, uncertainty, maybe even fear. Then Kane flipped the blade around and offered it handle first to the pilot. "All right, Richard. Tell me what you need me to do." Hawkins took the knife, and for the first time since Kane had seen him in the A-10's cockpit, the pilot smiled with something approaching warmth. "First, we're going to break out of Tiki. The escape from the safe house came at 0300 hours, when human vigilance was at its lowest ebb and mountain darkness provided perfect cover. Kane and Hawkins moved through the facility like synchronized predators, 3 years of mutual antagonism, transformed into deadly cooperation by necessity and shared purpose. 2 guards died silently, one from Kane's combat knife between the ribs, the other from Hawkins's garrote wire applied with surgical precision. They moved past motion sensors that Hawkins had somehow disabled, through corridors that the pilot navigated from memory despite claiming he'd never been in this facility before. "How do you know this place so well?" Kane whispered as they crept. "Past a room full of sleeping contractors." "I helped design the security system," Hawkins replied, "back when I thought I was working for the good guys." They reached the motor pool without raising an alarm. A dozen vehicles sat in neat rows, SUVs, motorcycles, and a single armored Humvee that looked like it had seen better wars. Hawkins headed directly for a nondescript Toyota pickup truck that wouldn't have looked out of place in any Afghan village. "This one," he said, producing keys from seemingly nowhere. "Modified engine, reinforced chassis, and most importantly, it's not equipped with tracking devices." Kane climbed into the passenger seat, noting the way Hawkins moved. Careful, deliberate, favoring his left side where the burn damage was worst. "Where are we going?" "Bagram Air Base, about 60 kilometers north." Hawkins started the engine, which purred with surprising power. "My A-10 is parked there along with several other aircraft that Fallen Angel uses for off-the-books operations." Kane checked the pistol he'd taken from one of the dead guards, a Glock 19 with 2 spare magazines. Not much firepower for assaulting a major airbase, but it would have to do. They drove through mountain roads that seemed designed by sadistic engineers, switchbacks, and hairpin turns that would have challenged a mountain goat. Hawkins navigated without headlights, using night vision goggles that turned the world into green-tinged clarity. "Tell me about Fallen Angel," Kane said as they descended toward the valley floor. "How big is this organization?" "Bigger than you think, smaller than they want to be. Maybe 300 people worldwide, CIA case officers, military contractors, private security personnel, pilots like me who were supposed to be dead." Hawkins downshifted as they approached a checkpoint that appeared to be abandoned. "The beauty of the operation is its compartmentalization. Most people working for Fallen Angel don't even know they're part of it." "What do you mean?" "Your team's mission, for example. You got your orders through legitimate channels from people who thought they were sending you on a routine surveillance operation. The only person who knew it was a trap was your handler, someone high enough in the chain of command to access real intelligence and modify mission parameters." Kane felt ice forming in his stomach. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell?" "Possibly. Or someone above her who used her as an unwitting conduit." The point is, most of the crimes are committed by people who think they're following legitimate orders. They reached the valley floor and began traveling on smoother roads. In the distance, Kane could see the lights of Bagram Air Base, one of the largest military installations in Afghanistan, home to thousands of American and Allied personnel. "How do we get onto the base?" Kane asked. Hawkins smiled grimly. "We don't sneak in, Marcus. We walk through the front gate like we belong. There." 20 minutes later, they were doing exactly that. Hawkins had produced identification cards from a hidden compartment in the truck, military IDs that showed them as Captain Richard Hawkins and Lieutenant Marcus Kane, both assigned to Joint Special Operations Command with the highest security clearances. The gate guards barely glanced at their credentials, waving them through with the bored efficiency of soldiers who had processed thousands of similar entries. Kane marveled at the audacity of it, hiding in plain sight among the very people they were fighting against. "The IDs are real," Hawkins explained as they drove deeper into the base. "Fallen Angel has people embedded throughout the military. Bureaucracy. Creating false identities is as simple as entering data into a computer system." They parked near a collection of aircraft hangars on the base's eastern perimeter. Kane could see various military aircraft parked on the tarmac, helicopters, transport planes, and several fighter jets that gleamed under the runway lights. There, Hawkins pointed to a hangar with contractor services stenciled on its door. "My bird's in there, along with some other toys that Fallen Angel keeps for special occasions." They approached the hangar cautiously, but the area appeared deserted. Hawkins produced yet another key and unlocked a side door that led into the cavernous interior. Inside, Kane saw the black A-10 Warthog that had nearly killed him 2 days ago. The aircraft sat like a mechanical predator, its twin engines and massive gun giving it an unmistakably aggressive appearance. But what caught Kane's attention were the other aircraft sharing the hangar, a pair of Apache attack helicopters, a small transport plane, and something covered by a tarp that looked suspiciously like a drone. "Impressive collection," Kane said. "Fallen Angel operates its own private air force. Officially, these aircraft don't exist. They're listed as destroyed in combat or transferred to allied nations. In reality, they're used for operations that the U.S. government can't officially acknowledge." Hawkins walked over to a wall-mounted computer terminal and began typing rapidly. "I'm uploading the intelligence your team gathered. Photographs, GPS coordinates, everything Fletcher documented during your surveillance mission." "Where are you sending it?" "Multiple destinations. Pentagon investigators, FBI counterintelligence, several journalists who specialize in military corruption stories. By the time Fallen Angel realizes what's happening, the evidence will be in too many hands to suppress." Kane watched the upload progress bar crawl across the screen. "What about my team? They're still in danger until this goes public." "Already taken care of." Hawkins pulled out a satellite phone and speed-dialed a number. "Sarah, it's Reaper. Execute Shepard protocol immediately." Kane grabbed Hawkins's arm. "Who the hell is Sarah?" "Sarah Chen, investigative journalist for the Washington Post. She's been working on a story about military contractor corruption for 6 months. Your team's evidence is exactly what she needs to break the story wide open." The phone conversation was brief and cryptic, but Kane gathered that Sarah Chen was already mobilizing her network of sources and contacts. Within hours, the Fallen Angel story would be front-page news across multiple media outlets. "Your boys will be in protective custody by morning," Hawkins said, pocketing the phone. "FBI will pick them up under the guise of a debriefing, but they'll actually be keeping them safe until the story breaks." Kane felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. "So it's over?" "Not quite." Hawkins walked over to his A-10 and began his pre-flight inspection. "There's still the matter of making sure Fallen Angel's leadership doesn't disappear into the night with their offshore bank accounts and new identities." "What do you mean?" "I mean we're going to pay a visit to the real architects of this operation, The men who decided your team needed to die to protect their profits. Kane watched Hawkins check the aircraft's weapons systems. The A-10's 30mm gun was loaded, and he could see Hellfire missiles mounted under the wings. "Where are we going, Richard?" "Dubai. There's a private compound there where Fallen Angels leadership is having their quarterly board meeting. They think they're safe behind their private security and diplomatic immunity." Hawkins's scarred face was grim. "They're about to learn otherwise." Kane climbed into the A-10's cockpit, settling into the rear seat typically occupied by a weapons systems officer. The interior was cramped but functional, designed for pilots who needed to survive in the most hostile environments on Earth. "This is insane," Kane said as Hawkins started the engines. "We're talking about attacking a civilian target in a neutral country. That's terrorism." "That's justice," Hawkins replied. "These men orchestrated the attempted murder of 8 American soldiers to protect their criminal enterprise. They've sold weapons to our enemies, trafficked drugs through military supply chains, and corrupted dozens of good officers who thought they were serving their country." The A-10's engines spooled up to full power, their deep rumble vibrating through the aircraft's frame. Outside the hangar, Kane could see base personnel going about their routine duties, unaware that 2 ghosts were about to steal a military aircraft. "Besides," Hawkins added as he taxied toward the runway, "they won't be expecting us. Officially, I'm dead and you're missing in action. We're going to hit them before they even know we're coming." The A-10 lifted off into the Afghan night, its navigation lights dark as it climbed toward cruising altitude. Below them, Bagram Air Base shrank to a collection of tiny lights, while ahead lay 6 hours of flight time over some of the most dangerous airspace in the world. Kane checked the aircraft's communication system and found it equipped with encrypted radios and satellite uplinks that could reach anywhere on the planet. For the first time in days, he had the ability to contact his team directly. "Don't," Hawkins said, somehow reading his thoughts. "The moment you transmit, Fallen Angel will know we're alive and mobile. Let them think we're..."